Putting on my top hat, tying up my white tie, brushing up my tail. Oh,
Welcome to Hatcast,
the podcast about hats.
I'm Charles Bourbon,
And I'm Carl Bernhardson.
and we are here to talk about hats.
Yes, we are.
Well, we're here to talk about
Sometimes.
subjects revolving around hats.
Yes,
I think on this particular occasion, as it's my view that we're not actually talking about hats.
And I think that we are talking about hats. We're introducing conflict into the series.
No, we're not.
Yes, we are.
See, that was a miniature example of what a conflict can be.
A little taste of the argument to come.
Yes. Today's episode, as you will have seen if you read the title of the episode, is about whether wigs are hats.
Yes, wigs, is it a hat?
Now, we don't mean Whigs, the member of the defunct political parties.
Right, that's not a hat. We know that.
Those are people.
Right.
They can wear hats.
We're taking the H out.
Yes.
And just W-I-G. And this is in reference, if you're not familiar, to an item, which I think is rather hat-like, that someone puts on the head to represent hair. And sometimes it can be meant to very seriously represent hair.
Or sometimes it's a frivolous nod at the idea of hair.
Right, like a clown or a powdered wig, which, is very obviously not your real hair.
Right. A powdered wig is not intended to look like real hair.
Right. So, I don't know. How do we start this? Do we talk about the history of wigs? Or do you want to...
No, I think we could do an episode about the history of wigs.
Right.
I mean, do you think we should do the history of wigs?
No, I don't think so. I think that we need to determine whether a wig is a hat. And I guess, let me set my premise, right? A wig is worn on the head like a hat. A wig is a hat.
I will say right then and there, you said a wig is worn on the head like a hat.
Okay, I meant by like, I mean as one would, right?
Even if you say a wig is worn on the head as one would a hat. I could say I sat on that log as one would a chair. The log is not a chair. I've just employed it in a similar fashion as one would a chair.
I think that you've turned the log into a chair by sitting on it. You, through the transformative power of action, have made that log a chair.
I don't think you have. I think you wouldn't say that the lumberjacks came out of the woods with many chairs.
Well, they're not chairs.
It's not made into a chair until the carpenter does so. You can sit on it as one might a chair.
But you could say very, very clearly, my chair is a log, right? My hat is a wig.
You could speak metaphorically, yes. All that needs to be said about wigs, really, in terms of wigs have been worn ever since people had heads, I imagine.
Right. Yeah, if you want to represent hair on your head and you either don't have it or want more of it or want it to appear different than the hair that sprouts naturally, you would take something that is sort of strandy, whether it's human hair or horse hair or straw or nylon threads, and put it on your head.
Yeah. And they came in the 17th century in England as a particular style that a gentleman would wear a wig.
Right. It became something that you were expected to wear outside of the house, right?
Yeah. And they...
like a hat.
They became much smaller in the 18th century.
Yes.
The people would, but even the 17th and 18th century, and they were out by the beginning of the 19th century.
Right.
But in the 17th and 18th centuries, you would wear a hat over your wig.
Right. I consider that more of a compound hat made out of two parts. One being this sort of curled and powdered hair, and then you set a hat on top of it. It's kind of funny because think of the powdered wig, right? It's a representation of hair that isn't very hair-like. And then you have the tricorn hat, which is kind of a representation of a hat, but folded in on itself.
Tricorn is a hat that is in a particular form.
It's a hat, though, that's been altered, for convenience to be more you wear it because you're supposed to be wearing that hat. It's lost some of its function in the same way that this wig is not doing what hair naturally would do. It's all sort of representative and on your head.
That makes it a variety of hair, which I would also dispute, not a variety of hat.
I guess How then do we define a hat? Right? Where are the lines for hat?
All right, let's look into that. We'll go to Oxford Dictionaries, which tells us hat is. This is not the OED, but it's
Something like it.
it's from the same publisher. A shaped covering for the head, worn for warmth as a fashion item or as part of a uniform, or used to refer to a particular role or occupation of someone who has more than one.
You see,
And this definition would
it's broad enough to include a wig.
include a wig.
Okay,
yeah.
not all. Okay, so I wouldn't say all wigs, right? I wouldn't say that this includes a wig that you would just wear to trick somebody into thinking that you had hair. That's sort of an odd way to put it. But
yeah.
It definitely would include the powdered wig. The powdered wig was definitely worn as an item of fashion, and in many cases, there were specific powdered wigs for specific professions.
Yeah, there were. Its definition of the wig is kind of amusing. A covering for the head made of real or artificial hair, typically worn by judges and barristers in law courts, or by people trying to conceal their baldness.
You know what? That's concise, and both a hat and a wig are primarily defined as being a covering for the head.
They are both, and that is undeniable, they are both coverings for the head.
So, well, maybe we just need to change the title of this program to Coverings for the Headcast, and be done with it.
Well, we could.
No, that's what I would call a bad idea.
It is a bad idea. I don't think we should actually do that. This defining a hat as a covering for the head, in one sense, is a good idea, but I think it's too broad, really.
So how would you narrow that down?
I think if you call it just a covering for a head, you're including, then the scalp is a hat.
The scalp is part of the head. It doesn't cover
Then
the
my
head.
hand is now a hat once I've placed it on my head.
I wouldn't disagree.
You wouldn't read a book. As he wiped his brow, his hand became a hat. And then was denatured once the brow wiping was complete.
Charles, I think you've got some avant-garde stuff going on here. You should write it down and get it published. My hand becomes a hat. My hand becomes a hand again. Yeah, we could at least make a poem out of it.
One could. Yeah, so I think what we're really getting into is what Wittgenstein talked about in semantic holism.
If you would.
And this, what Wikipedia summarizes it like this. Semantic holism is a theory in the philosophy of language to the effect that a certain part of language, be it a term or a complete sentence, hat, for instance, can only be understood through its relations to a previously understood larger segment of language.
To summarize.
You cannot have a non-relational definition of a hat.
Right.
People sometimes talk about this in terms of a semantic cloud.
Okay.
And I've heard people talk about this in terms of what is a sandwich. Specifically around the term, is a hot dog a sandwich?
Right.
Many people would say, well, it contains meat and sometimes other substances made for eating between bread. Therefore, it's a sandwich.
Right.
But other people wouldn't say so. A hat is closer to the edge of where the semantic cloud fades away than a BLT, which no one would argue is a sandwich, is in the middle of the semantic cloud.
No one would argue that a BLT is a sandwich?
No one would argue that it's not.
Oh, it's not a sandwich. Okay.
So to remain with sandwiches, there are some that are closer to platonic sandwiches.
Right, so the ideal form of sandwich.
Yes.
Right.
And there are some that are further off. But you can't come up with a definition of a sandwich, just as I think you can't come up with a definition of a hat that doesn't exist in relation, that works, and that doesn't exist in relation to examples of hats and other utterances. Mm-hmm. So, I think, for example, a bowler is right in the center of that semantic cloud.
Right.
I think the wig, while it is a covering for the head, has floated so far off afield.
Why is it so far off, though? Just because it's a hat that's representational, right? It's a hat that is meant to look like something else, but I could wear... how is it different than like a faux fur hat? It's a hat that's pretending to be made out of fur.
Well, I think it's very clear how it's different. One is...
I mean, a fur hat, it's even made of hair. How is a fur hat and a wig all that different?
I think a hat is a discrete object, a hat is not meant to imitate something other than a variety of hat.
Okay.
Now, there are some novelty hats which are in some sense representational.
Right.
You could wear a hat that is shaped like an elephant.
A hat that is shaped like cheese.
Yes, a cheese hat. But nonetheless, that is in no way meant to convince someone that you have placed a piece of cheese on your head. A wig, in its platonic form, is something that is meant to approximate hair. Now, there are some that have strayed from that. For instance, they make bright green wigs.
Right.
Clown wigs.
Mm-hmm.
Barrister wigs. These are wigs that are not fooling anyone into thinking they're hair.
Right.
But what they have come to represent is a variety of stylized wig. A variety of stylized thing that is supposed to represent hair. Rather than a variety of stylized thing which is supposed to represent something that only exists to be put on top of the head.
Right. I see where you're coming from. And I think that in most cases you are right. I think that it gets tricky in the fringes there. Right?
There are some liminal cases.
Right. There is some. I'm taking my hands and I'm sort of intertwining my fingers to suggest overlap.
Yeah.
To describe it to this microphone. Right. And I think that there is some room for discussion and for some conflict. At least 20 minutes worth. But yes, I do see what you're saying, and I do agree to some
in substance.
extent.
Yeah,
yes,
there are such things as, for example, there are comedy props which consist in a hat on top of a wig.
Right. Well, do you know what would be even funnier? A wig on top of a hat.
I don't even know what that would look like.
Close your eyes and picture.
I think if you saw someone wearing a wig, a bald person wearing a wig, walking down the street,
right,
you would say that person is... You wouldn't say that's someone wearing a hat. You would say that person has gone out without a hat. I mean, you might not say either of those out loud if you just saw someone walking down the street. But you wouldn't use that as an example of someone upholding the time-honored tradition of wearing hats outdoors.
Right. Yeah, you're right. I'm sorry to have just collapsed like this.
Goodbye.
No, I think there's still more to say.
Yes.
I think that I'll have to be more specific in my argument
that
that wig is hat. I'm going to continue to argue, though, that a wig, which is not meant to represent hair, but is instead worn as a covering on the head, and meant to be obviously something covering your head with other functions, be they, social or warmth and that kind of thing, does really, really, really tread on hat territory.
I think if we're talking in practical terms,
yes.
Let's say that we were a pair of strange people who liked to describe everything we saw to each other.
Okay. We're not so far from the truth.
But, I mean, we would get into a car and say, we're in a metal object rolling. No, we wouldn't actually. But let's say what I'm trying to say is, let's say we're describing a person.
Okay.
And we're describing a person in a barrister's wig.
Right.
Would I say that's somebody wearing a hat?
That looks like hair.
Yeah, I could say that's a person wearing a hat that is kind of made to look like hair, but isn't very realistic, and is sitting on top of his other hair.
No, there's a word for that, and that word is wig. That person is wearing a wig. I wish I was more stubborn. I wish that I could. I was rolling with it for a while. I thought that this is going to be good. We're going to have a little bit of back and forth. Wig is a hat. But no, wig is wig, and hat is hat.
Oh, well,
and never the twain shall meet.
There are places where the twain meet. I have seen such novelty things, or the bozo clown items.
Oh yeah, they come sort of the big red wig with the little blue hat, right?
Yeah, I think that's a 2-in-1, but in general, yeah. But that's all right. Well, audience, it's entirely possible that you will think we're wrong.
This is true. And you can write in and join the conflict, right? That's
And I will say, as a concession, I have that Ushanka that we talked about in a previous episode. I think when wearing it, it does just sometimes kind of look like you just have very shaggy hair.
It does, yeah. From 30 yards away, you just think Charles has got some very sort of boxy hair. What's going on?
Well, I don't think that makes it a wig, but it does draw it closer to the wig area.
Right. Oh, we did forget. We forgot to say what hats we're wearing.
We're the same as last time because we're recording the same day.
Oh, you've ruined the illusion. No. And you've ruined my joke.
Right. Oh, I didn't. For some reason, I just thought you were resting your hand that way.
Charles, as someone who describes everything that you see, what do you see?
A fan on the ceiling with no.
In my direction.
Oh, you are putting your hand on top of your head and making it become a hat.
Yes, my hand is a hat.
Now a hat.
Today
yes.
I chose to wear my hand. Sorry, that one didn't work as well as I thought it would. Maybe the listeners will find it. No, it's okay. The listeners might find the train wreck that was that joke maybe funny in having failed.
I think it's now funny on a second level entirely. Well, that's our views on wigs. Are they hats?
Yeah.
Please share yours. Our email address is hatcast@yandex.com. That's HATCAST at YANDEX.com.
Do we rate the conflict on style and practicality?
Sure. I think it was. Well, how do you rate the style of a conflict?
Did we? How did we carry it out? Did we?
Isn't that a little bit? I think if we rate ourselves highly, that seems immodest, doesn't it?
That's true. You know what? This is just a landmine. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
What's that on your head? What's that on your head?